Hello and welcome back to our interviews with our amazing members all over the world. It's my great pleasure to welcome back Alistair Murray from RSS in the UK Relocation Support Services. We spoke right at the beginning of this. In fact, I think you were one of the very first people that I did speak to. I think probably it would have been the second week of the UK lockdown, just as the government had announced the financial support for companies. So first of all, it's lovely to see you, as it always is. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Really good. I did, in preparation for our conversation today, I did have a quick look back at our initial interview in March, and yeah, a lot has changed since then. And I completely take your point in one of your other interviews that you say time is like an elastic band, because it feels like yesterday and a million years ago at the same time. It's really strange.
It is strange.
I think that was actually 3 months ago. And so much has changed, not least, of course, the technology that allows us to do this without being interrupted by having to use a different platform. So, I'm very well, thank you. I think I was probably a rabbit in the headlights a little bit in March.
But we all were.
Yeah, I think we all were. And also, at the time, everything we talked about on the day was out of date by the time it went out the next day. So things changing at a rapid pace. So I am probably calmer and more in control than I was 3 months ago. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because like you said, I still sort of go like that. We were just saying before the call, suddenly you're talking about work things and how things are going to go forward, and things seem quite normal. And then you read something and the world is still a very surreal place. So tell me, what is happening right now in the United Kingdom?
So we are coming out of lockdown to an extent. Certain restrictions are being eased. July the 4th, this weekend, this Saturday, is seen as an important day because bars and cafes and restaurants can open, obviously with certain social distancing measures in place. So we are seeing that change. There are elements of normality returning to everyone's life. Again, you look on the government website, and it does still say bullet point number 1 is still stay at home as much as possible. And bullet point number 2 is still work from home where possible. So we are still in lockdown, but measures are being eased. And then slowly over time, there's an element of the possibility of international travel. So people can now come to the UK, but be quarantined for 14 days. And most of the talk in the media at the moment is that will not be the case for too much longer. It has been in place for a while. We've certainly dealt with assignees and clients who've been asking lots of questions about how that will work in practice. But it seems like that may not be the case for certain countries. And the detail of that is to be announced within the next day or two. So the government is talking about setting up traffic light scheme where different countries, depending on their number of cases per 100,000 people of their population, will be green, amber or red. And then the red countries you'll have to quarantine, but the detail is all to be announced. So I think as we said before the call, going into lockdown, everything was pretty clear. It was pretty binary. You just stayed at home and you went for a one walk a day and went possibly to the supermarket every few days, and that was it. And there was no real room for interpretation. Now things are a little bit more difficult to keep up with. So from a personal and professional level, we're kind of back to looking at the news on a regular basis, watching all the press conferences just to see where we're at, because we all are being bombarded with questions about how things work. So it's certainly an interesting time. I think everyone's kind of keen to get back to some level of normality and certainly get the economy moving again. Our Prime Minister Boris Johnson has just given a speech this morning to talk about build, build, build is the new catchphrase. Homes and infrastructure and industry, we need to start the economy moving, which is positive. It's positive for the country as a whole and positive certainly for our industry. So long may that continue.
Fingers crossed. It's really interesting that you mentioned that press conference this morning, because again, when I was reading about that, it's almost like the kind of New Deal in the US, after the Great Depression. It's just going to be very interesting to see how all of this goes. But in the meantime, so you said there about the 14-day quarantine and that things are starting to move for you again. So first of all, how is your team? And second of all, because I know you have a great team, and second of all, what are they doing at the moment?
I said this before to you, but my team are amazing. They're incredible. And I know, everyone will say the same thing. I genuinely believe they've been absolutely wonderful throughout the last 3 months. It's really not an easy time for any of them. And the level of resilience that they've shown has been remarkable. They're a very positive bunch. I think we have developed a company culture over the last few years, and there's a certain type of person that works at RSS, and they are positive, they do work hard, and they have a good sense of humour. And that really helps at the moment. So everyone's just kind of getting on with it, but doing it in the right spirit. So we do have regular professional and social calls to keep in touch. And they've done an amazing job. Yeah, working really, really hard. It's that fine balance between trying to save money and take advantage of the furlough scheme in the UK, but also have the right number of people to answer the number of questions and queries and files that we're dealing with at any one time. So that's a constant conversation. And we're now coming through the other side of that. So we're unfurloughing people to help with the increased activity. So we had one person come back 2 weeks ago, and we have another person starting this week, starting back. So our weekly catch-up calls on activity and what's happening in the marketplace are getting bigger. It's great. More faces on our Zoom meetings and everyone talking about how they're busy. And so we do look at that on a regular basis and say, well, do we at some point need to bring someone else back? And so that will probably happen again in 2 weeks' time, hopefully, if we continue on a upward curve, which seems to be the case. Again, as you say, with caveats in place, because we think emotion and activity, productivity, all these things kind of go in waves. They don't change in straight lines. They go up and down and all over the place. So we have to adapt to that. But generally, yeah, they've been great. They've been an amazing bunch, and they are busy. So they've been busy throughout, really, for the last 3 months. We've never reached that point of being in sort of hibernation mode. We've never reached a point where we don't have any files that are active and our account managers have nothing to do. That hasn't happened. There have always been people looking to either leave the UK, have an initial inquiry about coming to the UK, some looking to extend their tenancy. So there's always been activity, plus a huge number of questions about what's happening politically and economically, and that's never gone away. So we've always been busy, and now that's picking up. So a number of the people that said they have no idea when they're coming to the UK are now getting in touch, replying to our emails to say they're looking to arrive, if not July, then in August. So things are starting to happen. So again, fingers crossed, big caveat in place, absolutely, touch wood, but things are moving. So in general, we are ahead of where we thought we were going to be at this time. In March and the beginning of April, we were putting forecasts together and trying our best to predict the future in terms of the finances of the business. It's a pretty difficult thing to do, but we're ahead of that forecast. So where we thought we were going to be in terms of the amount we were invoicing and the number of active files, we're ahead. So in the context of this year, I feel quite positive, actually. I feel quite like we're ahead of the plan, which is great. We did also predict that maybe things would come back to normal or some element of normality quite quickly in August and September and October. And that may not be the case. It may not be quite as steep a curve as we thought, but overall we're ahead. So things are going well, thank you. We're, like I say, ahead of where we thought we were going to be. I'm
so pleased to hear that, because like you say, it's just the longing for everyone to get back to normality. And I know your team have been brilliant. And actually, when I've been asking people about what's kept them going, it's been actually helping people has been such a great focus for
Yes.
you sort of stop thinking about what's going on in your own mind. We are going to be running a briefing in 2 weeks' time with you on like adaptability, expectation, changes to processes. What have you had to do so far in terms of like re-educating your teams as to how they're delivering the services that are starting up again?
So it's just, no, it's not just is the wrong word. It's destination services with social distancing.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we can provide to our signees and to our clients is done on a remote basis. So lots of telephone interaction, some email interaction, but less physical human interaction. So there have been more virtual viewings of properties. So when the property market did open, again, running through the government guidelines to check we were doing things correctly, the property market opened and people were able to view properties again, but with certain restrictions in place. So the number of people that could go and look at a property was a lot less than before, and also trying to restrict the number of properties that were viewed in a particular day. So ordinarily when one of our consultants would pick an assignee up, sometimes with their partner, sometimes with their children, and drive to look at, say, 10 properties in a day, that's not going to happen. What's more likely to happen is that we will be sharing videos of properties, 10, 15 short videos of what a property can look like, just to give an idea, in order to narrow that down, and then from there maybe pick one or two to view physically, and then done again with restrictions in place. So as few people as possible. Some of the estate agents in the UK have been very clear and said it's got to be one person viewing a property, and if more than one person turns up, we're not doing it. It's as simple as that. And then so that's worked pretty well. And there have been people from all over the world who arrived in the UK in March, haven't been able to do a great deal for a few months, but then have been waiting patiently to start to view properties. And others have inquired and asked if they can come within the last month or so and do their 14 days quarantine, sometimes in a service department, start looking at properties online whilst they're in their self-isolation quarantine phase, and then start to view the properties they like from the videos they've selected. So it's possible. In the same way with the other services that we provide, virtual orientation tours, household goods can still be done with extra PPE and a lot more cleaning. Compliance is incredibly strict in that industry, so it's still possible. So lots of these things can happen. Very few are currently able to say, no, that's not going to be possible. And some have been possible throughout. So like I say, if we're managing a dilapidation claim or extending a tenancy, those kind of things have been running throughout the pandemic in the same way they would ordinarily. So yeah, I think as with most of these things, the answer is yes, and then we work out a way to do it. We can find a way to make these things happen. It's just they're more time consuming and they're more involved at the moment than they would be ordinarily. So even to the point, I think you and I have discussed before, our guys are having briefing calls with people who they have so many questions at the moment. Nothing is straightforward. So briefing calls are taking longer than they would do ordinarily because people want to know what's happening in lots of different ways in the UK. And then when they arrive, the process is a little bit more complicated because compliance obviously is so important. And the phrase health and safety is something that almost a cliche and something you tag on to the end of the agenda of a meeting. Right now, it's the most important thing by miles. How is the health and the safety of our assignee population for each of our clients? That's the most important thing. So that's what we're concentrating on.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? It's like health and safety elevated to risk management moment, and
yeah,
you're going to be part of a briefing on risk management and how that's working. That's fascinating. And have you found? Oh, it's interesting. I was talking to Christine Martin in Spain a couple of weeks back, and she said, when we've been doing the virtual, because they were actually moving to virtual viewings. I don't think you were allowed to. And she said, when we do the recordings of apartments, we're not trying to sell it. We're trying to make sure we're saying that this might be an issue because the utility room's quite small, or the closet in this room isn't very big, rather than, you know, the estate agent approach, which is, welcome to this beautiful bijou apartment. Is that kind of obviously similar? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's our role, really. We're not looking to push a property or be biased. We are trying to give as accurate a representation as we can. So, yeah, we don't really want assignees to be picking a property purely on the basis of a video they've watched, because it doesn't give you a true picture. And we are in no way trying to encourage someone to take a particular property from a particular agent. That's not what we do.
Exactly.
And that's the benefit of physically going to view something and talking about the pros and cons and allowing it to be a two-way process. The last thing we want to do is encourage someone to take a property and then for them not to be happy with it. So it is. It's a bit like, you know, when you interview somebody, there's no point trying to sell your company and say absolutely everything is amazing all the time. It's much better to have an open and honest conversation. Say these are the benefits. These are some of the things that you might find tough, but these are the expectations we have, and knowing that it's the right decision. You know, I'm from both parties, and it's the same. I think when choosing a property, that's our job, to make sure it matches somebody's requirement. But we're certainly not trying to sell it. No. And that's why, where we can, we'll offer the virtual viewings as much as possible, but we still want to try to then say, can we go and show you the property? Or, you know, in some instances, it may be that an assignee will go and look on their own, and then we'll ask one of our team to go and look the next day, just to give an idea and report back on what we've seen, and have that conversation. Or it's done, you know, at a different time on the same day, because you'll notice something from the local area as an expert in UK property that you may not notice if you've never been to this country before.
Absolutely.
You know, it may be noise, it may be there's a high student population and they'll be, you know, up all hours, little things that you may not take into consideration, and that's part of the value that we add. So, and you miss that with a video. So yeah, I agree. I always agree with Christine, but yeah, I agree with her.
So tell me, what is the national mood? How are people in the UK doing?
The national mood, what a great question. I think probably an element of frustration. I think frustration in lots of different ways. So I think, you know, people do want to get back to normal. People do want to have an element of normality in their lives, but it's just at what cost? So I don't think anyone wants to, well, in that particular camp, nobody wants to rush to everything going back completely to normal, because then the last thing everybody in the country wants is a second spike and then being told, right, we're back to square one and everyone has to stay indoors and you can only leave the house once a day. Nobody wants that. And some people are therefore being cautious to try and avoid that. And I think others are just so desperate, sometimes for legitimate reasons. You know, if you've been stuck at home and you don't have a garden and you do have children, you're desperate to get outside. Or owning a business that's, you know, financially on its knees, you're desperate to get customers in the door. So I think overall, there's an element of cautious optimism. We see kind of green shoots of recovery in different areas, knowing that at some point there may be a risk of infections going up again in the future, hopefully not to the same level it was back in March and April. So the national mood is interesting. I think it's also difficult in terms of wanting to hold the government to account, but also not wanting to be too negative, because everyone agrees that hindsight is a wonderful thing. But I think some people would also agree that we had the benefit of looking at what was happening in other countries and maybe put some of the right measures in place, but at the wrong time. So for us, for example, the 14-day quarantine period of people coming into the UK, some people believe that may have been better in March and April rather than more recently. So it's difficult. I think, again, Dom, like I've said to you in the past, you can judge the national mood when you're sitting at home and looking at things online, and then sometimes you can leave the house and go to the park and think a completely different picture. So I have tried my best to avoid Twitter as much as possible, because you get a certain view of the country from that particular platform. So I've taken it off my phone and I try not to look at it on my laptop. And you go outside and generally the mood is better, and people are polite and people are compliant, and most people locally around me are following the guidelines and social distancing, and it feels like quite a positive place. And then little kind of pockets of activity of, like, our local cricket club has started doing bits and pieces, and certain local shops are getting back to normal again with restrictions in place, and that feels great. That feels quite positive, and that is nothing to do with kind of what's happening with protests in London and hundreds of thousands of people going to the beach in Bournemouth. So it's two different aspects of the national mood, and that's why, like you say, you can have waves of optimism and then think we're going to be in this for a long time yet, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, it seems. So yeah, they're definitely up and down.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very strange time because, like you said, when lockdown was in force, we knew what we were doing, and you knew you were doing the right thing just by following the rules. And now the rules are a bit more vague. We don't quite know what we're meant to be doing, and it's all a bit strange. But yeah, I must admit, those you mentioned that we were talking about it before the call about that there were amazing photographs of the beach over the last weekend, with just thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And yeah, interestingly, we ran, we're running the intercultural research about how people responded to government restrictions.
Yeah.
Looking at the last question of that this morning, and one of the last questions is, how confident are you about going back out, fully into society at this time? And it's very interesting how the responses that we've had from the US are much more positive than other places, where people are more concerned about how safe things are at the moment, and how we don't want to undo what we've done. So I think you hit that on the head. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the US is such a positive, optimistic place in the main, and possibly without grounds for too much optimism at the moment when you look at some of the numbers. But we did a similar kind of thing just within the company. So I put together a short survey of our team to ask them how they're feeling, particularly around going back to the office, and also productivity in terms of comparing working from home and working in the office. And the results were really interesting. So most people do want to go back. They want to be back in the office almost as soon as possible when it's safe to do so. And if that's September or October time, they do want to get back, mainly because of the social element of work. Everyone's got used to getting into a routine and being able to be productive at home. I think most of us agree we're probably in some ways more productive because the time you're spending commuting, you can actually start work earlier if the need, if you've got things to do at 8 o'clock, you can just get on and do it. But people miss, the social element of work. Also from a professional level as well, overhearing people on the phone, having conversations, bouncing ideas off different people, that's really important, and that's incredibly difficult to replicate in a virtual world. We don't set up Zoom calls to just have a chat about what was on TV, or if someone's on the phone, they're not going to be on Zoom so that everyone else can listen to them on the phone. We are kind of quite isolated from one another, doing our best to join the dots as much as we can, but that's definitely missed. So I think at some point, when it's safe to do so, we'll have people back in the office, but on a sort of rota basis.
That's really interesting, because we've kind of been doing, like we've been doing our team meetings and all that stuff with our small team, and we actually have to remember to write down things to talk about, like anything good on Netflix that I haven't seen.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't have that conversation where you do.
No, exactly.
When you're sitting opposite each other in the office, like, oh, last night.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
You miss that, and also there's that creativity, that sort of sharing, like you say, that you say, oh, I'm going to do this, and somebody else says, well, actually, it would be better if that's where it's more difficult.
Definitely.
Working out.
And that's amazing for the new starters we have in the business as well, because that's how one of the ways they learn is just by listening to other people. So they'll listen to a conversation or they'll listen to somebody on the phone, and that's a great way of picking things up. So yeah, we missed that, definitely.
Mm.
So I've changed my view, I think, probably a few times in the last couple of months, because to start with, I was thinking, oh, I can get used to this. Yeah, I don't miss the money I'm spending and the time I'm spending in driving to and from work. I can definitely get used to this. I think now most of us are coming around to the idea of some hybrid approach of probably a little bit more working from home than before, but definitely some days in the office with everyone else.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. And as you know, you're on the Euro board. We are in the process of closing the Euro office because we are all working from home successfully, and it saves money that we can put into other projects. But I don't think that'll be forever. I think there will come a point where we will want to be, like you say, in a hybrid collective kind of sense more together. Alistair, it's been brilliant to catch up with you. Thank you so much. It would be great to catch up again in sort of August. Find out how you're doing at that point, because things are moving now, more quickly, and let's hope that momentum continues. So
definitely, yeah, that'd be great. I'd probably feel like 5 minutes of.
I know. When you said that, it's just so weird, because obviously, we speak to each other a lot, but it's still, thinking back to that initial interview, it seems like yesterday. At the same time, it seemed a year ago.
No, exactly. It's very strange.
Be great to catch up in August. Thank you.
Yes,
so much.
Thank you very much.
In the meantime, take care, and all the best to all of your brilliant teams, who, by the way, will all be in the European. I love those fancy dress pics that you sent out.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Thanks very much, Dom. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.